Okay, we always open it up first to questions, comments, thoughts, observations, disagreements, conflicts. Any
Can we do a
questions?
little blessing before we learn Torah? I learned that in the book.
Of course.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
All right, great. Now, any Torah questions or thoughts or ideas before we go?
That's not what we talked about.
The one we talked
The
about.
word holy in Hebrew means kadosh, means separated. Now when Hashem tells us, I want you to keep my mitzvot, so you will be holy, so you can be holy unto me because I am holy. When Hashem said, I am holy, what does that mean? He's separated? That's what I don't understand.
Okay.
I always struggle with it, and I don't know what to do with it. Obviously, I don't understand it.
Maybe holy in different dimensions or something else.
Thinking, yeah.
That's my question.
No.
Here's what I would say. What does it mean, perhaps instead of understanding how we are to be holy from how God is holy, let's try to reverse that. Let's try to understand the meaning that God is holy from us being holy. What is the meaning of us being holy?
You asking me?
Yes.
I'm hoping to follow the mitzvot.
What does
will make
that
us
have to
holy
do with being separated?
from the rest of the world.
So we're being holy by fulfilling the mitzvahs. There's a problem with that explanation. That is that there is a separate obligation of you should be holy. In addition to the obligation to observe mitzvahs, there's another one of the 613 commandments, which is to be holy. So it can't simply mean to keep mitzvahs. We know that from the other commandments. What is the additional commandment, which we don't know otherwise, when it comes to being holy? Maimonides talks about this. That's Maimonides or Nachmanides. And he says, holiness, when the obligation of being holy means that even in areas of permissibility, one should maintain a certain higher standard. The line, which also one of the commentaries says, is it is possible to be a naval b'rshus haTorah. One can be a glutton with permission of Torah. In other words, I can find ways without breaking any of the commandments to still be a glutton, to still be a sloth, still be not a very very animalistic person. So Kedoshim is saying even in areas of permissibility, one should maintain a level of separation, should be above the animalistic nature of that which they're doing to some degree. Interestingly, the times in the Torah, it's not only once, several times, where the Torah says you should be holy, it is said in close proximity to two types of areas of prohibition. One is food. After it talks about the laws of kosher, it says you should be holy. The other is in areas of sexual, Yes, sexual behavior and sexual and areas where of prohibited relationships, and it's usually connected to one of those two where you have the idea of being holy. Maimonides explains, because even though there are ways, there are many forms of eating which are kosher, and even though there is intimacy which is permitted, it's precisely there where the Torah says, nevertheless, one should hold to a higher, holier standard when it comes to these areas, despite the fact they're permitted. So holiness is that even though I live in an animalistic world, I should be able to be above that which I am doing. When I am eating, I should be able to be above, separate from the animalistic nature. There should be a certain godly nature to what I'm doing. So, despite the fact that I am doing it, am I separate from the food? No, I'm eating the food. But I'm eating it with a degree of separation from it. that I recognize that I am not being controlled by the food. My animalistic side doesn't have complete control over me. I don't eat everything I see. I'm able to control myself, and the same is with intimacy, that I am able to control myself. I'm not an animal. So that which I am doing, there's a degree of separation, that I am a human being in control of what I'm doing. I'm not an animal who is controlled by my instincts. So separation doesn't mean not there. Separation means having a higher, loftier way of doing things. If that's what separation means, kadosh means for us, the same is true for God. God is not separate from the world, but God is also not bound to the animalistic nature of the world. And what God is saying is that, God, I created and I continue to create an animalistic world, but I am a holy God. I am above that. I am not bound to the animalistic nature of the world. I'm not a physical being. I am separate from that which I have created. I am above and beyond it. Just like we are supposed to be above and beyond the food which we consume. We shouldn't be consumed by it. God is above it. And God is saying, if you behave that way, you connect to me, who is that way as well. Just like if, so to say, we can get into parables, and it's a extensive topic, but separate doesn't mean not there. Separate means above it. Separate means that not bound to it, not under the control of it. The same is true when we talk about holiness. Our holiness doesn't mean we're supposed to stay away from the world. That's not our philosophy. It means be involved in it, but be above it as you're dealing with the world. Does that make sense?
It makes lots of sense. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
All right. Any other thoughts, or do we get into our topic?
We had one other one that we were talking about, and Michelle can correct me on where it appears in the first parsha. They talk about the creation of man, and apparently he's created in a basic level, and is said that he was asexual, had both male and female, and apparently the key was without a soul.
Right.
Then, was it 3?
Wait, why do you say without a soul?
It doesn't
Because,
say.
go ahead.
It doesn't say. In the end of chapter 1, Elohim asa et Adam. He made Adam. As a female and male, he created them in one body.
Right.
But it doesn't say he gave them the Ruach HaChaim. In the second chapter, verse 6, I believe, it says, Adonai Elohim yatzar et Adam, and then he blew into his nostril the Ruach HaChaim. So for some reason, we're not sure about that. Okay, we talked about that, and we don't know how to place them together. The end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2.
We thought maybe that in chapter 1, he created a basic life form, and the time denomination for this life form to go through an evolution like a protozoa and amoeba could be billions of years. And then
Rabbi,
in
we
chapter
studied
2,
Torah.
in chapter 2,
We studied Torah.
we talked about
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And in chapter
The
2,
word is different.
he talked about, yeah. And so we thought maybe he was creating man as we see man in the image we thought. And that's why we said maybe the first one didn't have a soul. And it's the theme of this parsha. It's a question of free will, having the ability to make decisions and responsibility and accountability that goes with it. That's what this parsha is. But the second reference we thought was a different individual. And this individual now had free choice, thought, and
125, 127.
I saw what you were referring to.
we couldn't reconcile it.
Oh, it doesn't say Vayivra. It doesn't say Asa.
Sure, it says in God
Vayivra.
created.
And the second chapter is say Vayitzar or Vayetzer.
Vayitzer.
Vayitzer, thank you.
Well, we believe the Kabbalah talks extensively about the 4 worlds of creation. Atzilus, Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Creation, forming, and acting, and making. So there is... You do find different terminologies for creation of man. In the simple pshat, in the simple understanding of the Torah, there are not 2 creations, there is 1 creation. And the first chapter goes through creation of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The second chapter begins the process of Shabbat and creation of man. So it's repeating the creation of man, which it already described in the beginning, in the end of the first chapter.
So could
It's
the
not
first
two
chapter
separate
be a
shifts.
the
It does say, however, in connection to what you're saying, there is something interesting in which it says that the creation of man was different than the creation of any of the animals. How's that? Two ways. One way is that when God created the animal was created as a living being. It says that. God created the animal was instantly alive. It wasn't two steps of creation. With the creation of the human being, it says first God created a lifeless form, and then blew into that form the breath of life. So in that sense, the human being is lower than the animal, because the human being at one point was a lifeless form. The animal was never a lifeless form. It was created as a living entity. The human being was created as a lifeless entity, and then God blew the neshama into it, which reaches the second difference, which when all other creation says God spoke and it came to be. With the human soul, it says God blew the soul into the being. It doesn't say God spoke and there was a human soul. It doesn't say that. Which Kabbalah touches upon. It says blowing requires more energy than speaking. So to say God required more energy to create the human soul than to create all the other creations of the universe.
So is it possible, one of the things that we had talked about was that the first reference, if it created a basic life form that we would call like the Neanderthal man who was no better than the animals.
Well, that can't be, because right from the beginning, God says, I will create a being which will control all of the animals. Right? In the very first, verse 26, God says, let us create man in our image. So already it was in God's image. It can't just be a simple being. It was already in God's image, and he will control in the fish and in the birds. Verse 26.
Long time ago, I did read some commentaries from the Zohar, and the Zohar talking about Adam Kadmon.
Right?
That's
Adam Kadmon is God. Is a godly being. Is not a human being.
okay.
Adam Kadmon is what we call a supernal man.
Yes.
That's a description, that's a form of godliness. Not a human being. In fact, the word Adam, where does the word Adam come from?
Earth.
Adam.
That's one. That's
Adam.
one meaning, but there's another meaning to the word Adam. Adam generally is Adama, means earth, but it also Adameh in Hebrew means similar to. Adameh, similar to, because
Yeah.
Adam is Adameh, similar to God. So the word Adam captures both the highest and the lowest message. On the one hand, it's like earth, reminding us where we come from, but it also reminds us of our potential. Adameh, that what we can be is similar to God.
In modern Hebrew, say Dome.
Domeh,
Yeah.
similar to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. Rabbi, you're a star today.
I'm what?
You're
You're
a star.
Thank you.
Oh.
We're going to have to study harder.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to come to help.
Yes, this past week I spent the Shabbos with some 40 or 50 other rabbis in Chicago. Some famous Rabbi Tulushkin. You ever heard of him? He was
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Jacobson, great
Oh,
scholar.
Steinsaltz, of course. Wow.
Rabbi Soloveitchik. Sorry?
Rabbi Steinfeld.
Yes, he was there.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, it was
And
a lot of
Tulushkin,
rabbis.
Who just wrote the book on Rabbi Schneur.
Yeah, both Rabbi Tulushkin and Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote books like that. Yeah. You know, they say about a barber. You ever heard about the barber who gave free haircuts to men of religion? No? So the barber gave free haircuts to people, very religious people. So a priest walks in and gets a haircut, and he says, how much do I owe you? The barber says, no, I respect you. And therefore it's for free. The next day, there's a dozen roses on the front door of the barber shop. A week later, a Muslim, what do you call it, imam? Imam came in and got a haircut, and he was about to pay, and he said, no, I don't charge you. I respect all religions, all men of the cloth, and therefore you don't have to pay me. And the next day, sure enough, again, a dozen roses on the front door of the barber shop. Then a week later, a rabbi came in, and he took off his yarmulke and said, okay, get a haircut, don't touch the beard. And he gave him a haircut, and then the rabbi took out his wallet, and he said, Rabbi, for you, there's no cost. And the next day, there were a dozen rabbis at the front door. Okay. All right, so let's, now that you've asked me some questions, let me pose the following question to you.
Easy.
An easy one. Here we go. The question is, what's the most important mitzvah in the Torah?
To love God and to fear God.
Can I guess?
Okay, you just gave two. Yes.
ואהבת את רעך כמוך.
Love your fellow as yourself, okay? I think we go around the table, and there may be no wrong answers. Any other thoughts? You said love your fellow as yourself. You have to narrow it down to one. You gave me two.
I would have gone originally with love God, but having read through more of the Sedra, I'd say fear God.
Okay.
Shabbat.
Shabbat, all right. Any other opinions or thoughts on this?
I think I know.
Oh, what's that?
Raise your hand.
How many options do you got?
לאהוב
What?
את הגר.
To love the convert, okay?
That's happened many times.
All right.
Yes.
All right, so the truth is, it's very hard to give, there's nowhere in the Talmud where it says this is more important than anything else. And one could argue, for starters, that the most important mitzvah is believe in God. That's the beginning of everything. If you don't believe in God, you don't have any of the mitzvahs. You said, you spoke about ve'ahavta re'acha kamocha, love your fellow as yourself. There's certainly room to say that. We have the famous Talmud, where Hillel says that's all of the Torah, the rest is commentary. We find sometimes tzedakah described as the ultimate mitzvah. But the one I'm going to discuss today is the one which, Bob, which you said, which is the obligation to fear God. And it's a mitzvah. And it's a mitzvah in this week's Torah portion. I'm going to read for you the verse in the Torah portion, if you'd like, if you have the same Chumash as I do. It's page 1137. It's chapter 10, verse number 12.
I don't fear God.
Okay.
But
Well, we're going to discuss that today, though.
It's a
The word fear is very
fear.
tricky
The word
It's
fear is
very tricky
misnomer.
word.
The what?
It's a misnomer. When it's in.
Well, we'll discuss that.
Chapter 10, verse 12.
We will get into that.
That's very tricky.
I'm sorry?
11:20.
I told her the word fear in Hebrew is
We have
very
a different
tricky.
We'll
book than
certainly
him.
get into
No.
that.
What book is it?
11:27. I got 11:37. It's gonna be the same book.
I'm so down. I'm so bad. 12 what?
This is Jack.
Chapter 10, verse 12.
Chapter 10.
I've got 11:20.
All right, so here's the verse.
Which verse are you looking at? 6?
Verse number 12. It's the last
Wow, my
verse,
goodness.
chapter 10, verse number 12.
Okay.
Are we ready? Let's do this.
Oh, I know
The
that
Ata
one.
Yisrael, and now Israel.
I know that one.
Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mi'imach. What is it that God asks of you? Ki'im. All that God asks of you is liyira es Hashem, to fear God. Here now Israel,
The Lord our God.
Moses says to them, Moshe is talking. He says, all God asks of you is to fear God. So, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it seems to be saying that that's all God asks of you. The Talmud poses a very important question. The Talmud says, and Talmud is in Aramaic, so I don't know if any of you will understand these words, but the words are, Atu yira milsa zutrasahi. Is fear of God something small? That Moshe says, all God asks of you is to fear. That's not small at all. It's saying, all I ask of you is to work 19 hours a day. What do you mean, all you ask of me? Moshe is saying, the words Moshe uses implies that fear is a minor requirement. Fear of God. The Gemara says, is it a small thing? And the Gemara answers, in Lagabe Moshe Milsa Zutrasahi. Yes, because for Moshe, it is easy. That's the Gemara's answer. For Moshe, for Moses, it was easy. So therefore, he was able to say, all God asks you is to fear. But that doesn't really answer the question. Moshe wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to the Jewish people. Moshe knew who the Jewish people was. The fact that it's easy for Moshe doesn't allow him then to say, all God asks from you is to fear. If it's hard for everyone else, then he should know that. A professional basketball player can't tell me, all I ask of you is to dunk a basketball. For you, it's easy. For me, it's impossible. So how is Moshe saying, all I ask you is to fear? Well, for him it's easy. How does that resolve the question? Moshe is talking to the people. The Torah is talking to the people. So we'll get back to that. But let's discuss some interesting elements to this mitzvah. This idea of fearing God. To be a God-fearing Jew. And I'll quote two interesting Talmudic discussions. Both of which emphasize this mitzvah of to have fear of God. One is a Talmud which describes the human being before he or she is born, and one which describes a human being after he or she has passed on. So, fascinating Talmuds. The first is as follows. Talmud says like this. The angel who is responsible for pregnancy, when a child will be conceived, the angel holds up that soul, so to say. Even though the Talmud gives very physical examples, obviously it's speaking in a deeper realm, but it says the angel holds up that soul and asks God the following. This soul, will it be wealthy or poor? Will it be wise or foolish? Will it live long or short? Whom will this soul get married to? And all these questions are posed and answered. However, the Talmud says there's one question the angel doesn't ask, and that is, will this soul be righteous or wicked? Not asked. Why? Because that's not determined. And therefore the Talmud concludes with the following line, which is a line commonly used. From here we learn that Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. Which means everything is in the hands of God except for fear of God. So there's this implication from the Talmud. Everything is in the hands of God. It doesn't say everything comes from God except for observance. It doesn't say everything comes from God except for religion. It says specifically everything comes from God except for fear of God. That's up to you. And therefore this soul, it doesn't determine whether the soul is going to be a God-fearing individual or not. So here you have from the very beginning of life that being God-fearing is up to you, and it's critical. Let's fast forward 120 years till afterlife, in which the soul ascends to heaven. And we have another fascinating Talmud, Tractate Shabbos. And the soul, perhaps you've heard of this. Have any of you ever heard of the questions posed to the soul upon its entering of the Day of Judgment? It says that each soul has to answer the following questions in the following order. No? Anyone ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Anyone want to venture a guess? What question or what question is posed
Can I
to the
guess?
soul? Yes.
Did you reach the potential you were given?
Okay. It's not one of the questions Tom says. Maybe there, but it's not one of the first 5 or 6.
Okay.
No, it is. That's certainly a question which is asked every soul,
Okay.
whether it's asked directly or indirectly. But that's the idea.
Did you use your free will to make the right decisions about life, rather
Okay.
than rather than the aspects of life that were controlled by
All
God?
right. Okay, but that's very general. There's some very
Yeah.
specific questions. You're right, but that's kind of the that's
Were you a righteous person?
yes. Again, this more specific though.
Did you give charity?
Did you
Oh,
love
so that's a good. What's that?
Did you love thy neighbor?
Okay, so let's go through the questions. All these questions are probably asked or demanded because if we are obligated, that means we have to take an accounting of them. But the Talmud shares these are the questions in the following order. The order of questions. The first is Nasasa v'nasata be'emuna. Were you honest in your business transactions? First question. Did you buy and sell faithfully? Question number 1. Question number 2. Kavata itim la Torah. Did you designate times to study Torah? Okay. Question number 3. Asakta bepirya v'rivya. Did you endeavor to raise a family? Not everyone can. Many people try, but did you at least endeavor? That you make an endeavor bepirya v'rivya to raise children, raise a family? That's question number 3. Question number 4. Tzipisa li Yeshua. Did you anticipate redemption? Yeshua means salvation. Did you anticipate the redemption? Did you look forward to the redemption? Those are the 4 questions asked at the beginning of the Day of Judgment. And then the Gemara concludes with something and says, however, regardless to the answers of those 4 questions, if a person can say that fear of God was my lot, in other words, that I had fear of God, then he'll be okay. She'll be okay. If not, then not. Then they won't be okay. In other words, that whatever the answer to those 4 are, the most important calculation a person must say is, was there fear of heaven? doesn't say love. It talks about fear of heaven. Again, even though we generally understand love and fear as the two foundations of our religion, nevertheless, again, there's an emphasis on fear. So then the question is, and again, I hope you follow along with what I'm about to say. The question is, if all that matters is fear of heaven, so why bother with the first 4 questions? Right? All you should be asked is, did you live in a state where there was fear of heaven? And I know we're going to get to the word fear. We'll get to that. We'll explain it better. But why did you, then what's the point of the other question? So the Talmud gives a parable. The parable, the Talmud says, is you can imagine a person who asks his attendant to please bring the wheat up to the balcony. Sometime later, he turns to his attendant and says, did you bring the wheat to the balcony? And he says, yes, I did. He said, did you mix into the wheat an amount of chumtum? Now, what's chumtum? Chumtum was like a salt, which was a preservative to the wheat. And the attendant says, no, I didn't. So he said, better had you not brought up the wheat. Because now you brought up wheat without the preservative, it's just going to go bad. The Talmud uses that as an analogy. And the analogy is basically saying that the fear of heaven is like the salt, which preserves all the good actions we do. That's why the 4 questions are asked. Because the 4 questions represent the mission we are entrusted with in life. Study Torah, raise a family, do good deeds, be honest. That's the mission. But the fear of heaven is the preservative, is the salt which preserves all of the good things we do. We are not sent to this world to fear God. That's not the purpose of us being here, to fear heaven. We are sent to the world to do good deeds and to accomplish good things. But it is only with the salt, the preservative of being a God-fearing person, will our actions remain holy. But you see a fascinating Talmud from before life, fascinating Talmud after life. You see from the verse, what does God ask you to fear God? That this is a major part of our religion. And sometimes we neglect to spend time thinking about it because for incorrect reasons we associate the idea of fear as something which is not good. And fearing heaven we understand as a negative, as a downer. Why focus on fear if we could just talk about love? Right? If we could spend the time with all the positive commandments of love and kindness and happiness and joy, then why even mention fear of heaven? But the truth is, this fear of heaven is not negative. In fact, I'm going to share at the end a beautiful Hasidic interpretation which makes it that this fear is the key to a very, very positive way of living. But it's most definitely an integral part of Judaism, perhaps a central and the most central part of Judaism. I mean, you see from all this, the Torah, the Talmud, that we have to ask ourselves that question. Am I a God-fearing person? Am I living up to what the Bible tells me? Time and again. This is not the only time. Here it says, all God asks you, but time and again the Talmud says, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. What does Es Hashem Elokecha Tira mean? God, your God, you should fear. So it's an obligation. It's a mitzvah. What does it mean? And am I observing it? Because ultimately I'm going to be held accountable for it. So to understand this, the first thing we have to say is like this. On its most basic, there are really 2 levels of fear of heaven, both of which are not negative. But there are 2 levels. The first is according to the Abarbanel, who explains that it's not really about fear, it's more so about awareness. It's about awareness of God's presence. There are words, I'm not sure if it's in this somewhere in this shul, but there are words which are to be found in many shuls, and the parochet, in many years, the words are Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, which means I have placed God in front of me always. According to the Abarbanel, this is the meaning of fear of heaven. It just means an awareness of God's presence. And if God is present, then I behave accordingly. The first question we have to ask ourselves, is there a king of the universe? The answer, we hope, Judaism says certainly yes. We have the king of the universe, which is God. And the next question is, do I believe that God wants me to act in a certain way? The answer is yes. God commands us to do a certain thing. And then the third point is, if that's the case, then I have to recognize and believe that God is in front of me at all times. God is right here. And if I could live that way, it's very difficult. In other words, it's not easy. But if I can live with a constant awareness that God is right in front of me, so then love and fear work hand in hand. It's not a fear something bad's going to happen. It's an awareness of God, and therefore I am ashamed to do something wrong in front of God. God is right here. How can I do something wrong? So if a person wants to ask themselves, am I observing this commandment? The question shouldn't be, am I waking up trembling? Am I standing in fear? No. The question should be, am I aware of God's presence upon me at all times? That's the simple understanding of Yiras Hashem. And that's why if you open the book of Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, it's got many volumes filled with hundreds upon hundreds of laws and rules and obligations. The first thing it says in there is, when you wake up in the morning, a person should think, after they say the Moda Ani, thanking God, think of those words, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, I have placed God in front of me at all times. And when a person can think that, then if a person can think that, then they will live with that obligation of reverence of God, of fear of God. There's a old Hasidic joke. I don't know if you'll get this. It's like a Hasidic joke, but they say it like this.
Like the 12 rabbis?
No, a little bit different. Say about a yeshiva student who was in a prominent yeshiva. And he left that yeshiva, and he went to a Hasidic yeshiva. He went from a regular yeshiva to a Hasidic yeshiva, where they studied more mysticism. So he says, so now, one day he met one of his old colleagues, and his old colleague started telling him, why did you leave our yeshiva? We had a great yeshiva, and you left, and you went away. He started, even, speaking negatively. Why did you leave? You went to a place which wasn't as scholarly. So finally he turns to him and says, you want to know why I left? I left because in this new yeshiva, where I'm at, they teach us how to read minds. He said, they teach us how to read. He said, really? He said, yeah, absolutely. He says, not only that, I can prove it. I can right now, whenever you want, I can tell you exactly what you're thinking. So his friend stopped and says, okay, tell me what I'm thinking right now. He says, you're thinking, he says, you're thinking, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid, that I place God in front of me at all times. He says, no, that's not what I was thinking. He says, and that's why I left you, yeshiva.
That's cute.
That's great.
So this is the definition of Shivisi Hashem, of fearing God. And that's why it's not negative. It's just a constant awareness of God's presence. Now I happen to love the God that is in my presence, but I also therefore behave accordingly. You could have a teacher or a principal who you really like, but when the teacher's in the room, you're not going to misbehave, especially if the teacher is right by your desk. You could love them, and at the same time, when the teacher turns around, then I can misbehave, but God never turns around. So therefore, that's what it is. That's the lower level of fear of heaven. There is a deeper level. And this deeper level is called awe. Not fear, but awe. What's the difference between awe and fear? What is awe?
It's to hold something in such high esteem that you fear not being able to live up to expectations and not fulfilling your responsibilities as a free person, free will again.
Okay.
And God is above everything.
All right. Right. Okay. So yes.
But judging by the word, yirah means to see.
It's all, oh, good. So this connects very much to the higher level of fear, is re'iyah, is to see. What is awe? So the Kabbalah talks about the lower love and the lower fear, yira tata, ava tata, and the loftier, higher love and the higher fear of God, yira ilah and ava ilah. What is the greater level of fear of God? It's awe. Now, what's awe? Awe is a different type of fear. It is a form of fear, but it's a different type of fear. It is not a fear of something happening to me. Not I'm afraid that someone or something may do something to me. It is, awe is feeling small in the presence of greatness.
Can't reach that level.
You sense something is so much bigger than you, and therefore you feel small, and there's a certain degree of awe. You hear all the time how people, they meet someone who is truly great, and they get all nervous. They can't say what they want to. You hear it all the time. I wanted to say something, but as soon as I saw that person, I clammed up. I couldn't say it. What happened? Why didn't you say what you wanted to say? Were you afraid that they were going to hit you? They weren't going to hit you. They weren't going to do anything to you. So what stopped you from saying what you wanted to say? The answer is you were in the presence of greatness, and it makes me feel small, and therefore there's this fear. It's not a fear of something that's going to happen to me. It's an awe. It's a reverence of being in the presence of something great. They say this a lot with the Rebbe of blessed memory. People who went by. I remember myself when, as a child, I went by the Rebbe, and there was, and I know the Rebbe since I grew up here in Michigan, but I heard the Rebbe is a truly holy man, a real saint. And then you go by, and I was trained. I was 10 years old, or not even 7 years old. I was told, remember to say in Yiddish, "Adank." That's all. Say "Adank," which means thank you. And I remember getting the dollars from the Rebbe to give to charity, and I froze. And you hear this again and again. And I think people can relate to this with any greatness. Someone will say, I met the president. I had a whole speech prepared, and as soon as I saw him, I froze. I couldn't say anything. Because greatness has the ability to cause us to feel small and to feel awe. On a somewhat different level, I think this is the cause for stage fright. What is at the root of stage fright? Someone stands up in public, they're in front of 1,000 people, all of a sudden the same person who was perfectly comfortable until a moment ago now is uncomfortable. What happened? They're not going to do anything. There's no fear. There's nothing bad is going to happen. But again, just as you can be fearful, feel small in the presence of one great person, you feel small in the presence of 1,000 people. That's just not necessarily because of quality, because of quantity. Quantity also makes us feel small. That's what when we say stage fright. Fright is fear. What are you afraid of? They're not going to do anything to you. It's a sense of awe. It's not really fear. Speaking in public, they say that death is actually the second greatest fear human beings have. The first greatest fear is public speaking. So, which means that by the funeral, the person would rather be in the coffin than be the one giving the eulogy. That would seem to be the logic of that. But the point is that there is this tremendous fear, stage fright. Why? It's not fear, it's awe. It's presence. There's something greater than me, so much greater than me. I feel small in that presence. The deeper level of fear of God is awe, is coming to an understanding of the greatness of God, and therefore feeling so small in the presence of God. Again, recognizing that God is here. And I am so tiny in comparison to the creator of all things, King of all kings. So it's an awe. It's a reverence of something far greater than me. It's not a fear of what will happen. It's a reverence.